Blood on the Prairie, written by Reuben White. Chapter 1. The stranger rides in. The sun was setting on the dusty town of Red River, casting long shadows over the weathered wooden buildings. The saloon doors swung open, creaking like an old man's knees, as a stranger rode in on a black stallion. His duster was as dark as midnight, and his eyes held the secrets of 1,000 miles of hard trail. Folks whispered as he passed, for in these parts a man without a name was a man with a past. John Ringo McAllister had a reputation that preceded him like a dust storm. A gunslinger with a tragic past, he had wandered from town to town, leaving a trail of blood and legend. Now, his journey brought him to Red River, a town perched on the edge of oblivion, where law was as scarce as water in the desert. Chapter 2. The Last Chance Saloon. Ringo tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped into the Last Chance Saloon. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, whiskey, and smoke. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he made his way to the bar, where a nervous barkeep polished glasses with a dirty rag. "I'll take a whiskey," Ringo said, his voice gravelly like the dry riverbeds of the West. As he sipped his drink, his eyes scanned the room, landing on a poker game in the corner. The players were a rough lot, with more scars than sense. One of them, a burly man with a scarred face and a surly disposition, caught Ringo's eye and sneered. "Stranger, you got the look of a man who thinks he's tough. You any good with that iron on your hip?" Ringo's hand hovered near his Colt .45, but he merely smiled. "Reckon I could be." Chapter 3. The Sheriff's Warning. Sheriff Bill Tate, a grizzled veteran of many a gunfight, watched the exchange from his corner table. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this stranger was a storm cloud rolling in. Tate approached Ringo with the deliberate steps of a man used to dealing with outlaws. "We don't take kindly to troublemakers in Red River," Tate warned, his hand resting on his own pistol. "Just passing through," Ringo replied, though his eyes told a different story. Tate wasn't convinced. "You best move along, stranger. This town's got enough ghosts." Chapter 4. The Hostage. The quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Ringo sprang from his bed in the boarding house, Colt in hand, and rushed to the window. Across the street, the bank was under siege. Shadows moved inside, and the occasional muzzle flash lit up the darkness. Ringo burst through the door, gun drawn, and sprinted towards the chaos. Inside the bank, bandits held the teller and a young woman hostage. The leader, a cold-eyed man named Jeb Hawkins, laughed as he stuffed money into a burlap sack. "Drop the iron, or she dies," Jeb growled, pressing his gun to the woman's head. Ringo's heart pounded like a stampede. His eyes locked onto Jeb's, and for a moment, time stood still. Then, in a blur of motion, Ringo fired. Jeb's gun flew from his hand as he crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder. Chapter 5. The Woman with a Red Ribbon. The hostage, a young woman with fiery red hair and a ribbon to match, ran to Ringo's side. "Thank you," she breathed, her green eyes wide with gratitude. "Name's Ringo," he said, tipping his hat. "Clara," she replied, her voice trembling. "Clara Evans. My father owns the bank." Tate arrived, his face a mask of relief and suspicion. "Looks like you just earned your keep, stranger. But don't think this changes anything. Red River doesn't need heroes." Chapter 6. The plot thickens. Days turned into weeks, and Ringo found himself unable to leave Red River. Clara's father, Mr. Evans, offered him a job as a guard at the bank, and though Ringo accepted, he knew it wasn't the money that kept him there. It was Clara and the unresolved tension that lingered between them. But peace was a fleeting illusion. One night, Ringo overheard a conversation in the saloon that made his blood run cold. Jeb Hawkins, though injured, had escaped jail and was forming a gang to take revenge on Red River and on Ringo. Chapter 7. The calm before the storm. The town buzzed with fear as rumors of Jeb's impending attack spread. Ringo prepared for the worst, knowing that Jeb would come not just for him, but for everyone in Red River. He trained the townsfolk in basic gun handling, turning the peaceful settlement into a makeshift fortress. Clara stood beside him, a rifle in her hands and determination in her eyes. "I'm not running," she said, her voice steady. "This is my home, and I'll fight for it." Ringo admired her courage, but worry gnawed at him. He had seen too many good people die, and the thought of losing Clara was unbearable. Chapter 8. The Showdown. Dawn broke with a blood-red sky, and with it came the sound of hoofbeats. Jeb and his gang rode into town, guns blazing. The battle that ensued was fierce and chaotic, bullets flying and buildings burning. Ringo fought like a man possessed, his colt barking death at every turn. Jeb, a viper in the grass, waited for his moment. When he finally confronted Ringo, their eyes locked in a silent promise of violence. "This ends now," Jeb snarled, his gun aimed squarely at Ringo's heart. Ringo's hand was quicker. His shot rang out, a thunderclap in the morning air, and Jeb fell, his life bleeding away into the dust. Chapter 9. Aftermath. The battle was won, but at great cost. Red River lay in ruins, its streets littered with the fallen. Ringo stood over Jeb's body, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Clara approached, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "It's over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ringo nodded, but he knew that for him, it was never truly over. The ghosts of his past would follow him wherever he went, and the blood on his hands could never be washed away. Chapter 10. The Ride Ahead. With the town safe and Jeb's threat eliminated, Ringo prepared to leave Red River. Clara watched him saddle his horse, a mixture of sorrow and understanding in her eyes. "Do you have to go?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ringo sighed, the weight of the world in his voice. "A man like me don't belong in one place for too long. But I'll be back. You can count on that." Clara smiled sadly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll hold you to it, Cowboy." Ringo mounted his horse and tipped his hat one last time. As he rode out of Red River, the horizon stretched before him, endless and uncertain. He was a gunslinger, a drifter, and a man haunted by his past. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was long, and the dangers were many. But Ringo McAllister was a man who thrived in the face of adversity. And no matter what lay ahead, he would face it with grit, determination, and the indomitable spirit of the Wild West. Chapter 11. The Haunted Past. As Ringo rode away from Red River, memories of his past began to resurface like ghosts in the fog. Every town he'd passed through, every face he'd forgotten, came back to haunt him. The faces of those he couldn't save, and the blood that stained his hands were reminders of a life lived on the edge of a knife. He remembered his family's ranch, now a distant dream, the fire that consumed it, and the men who took everything from him. That day, Ringo had sworn revenge, and it set him on a path of violence and sorrow. The promise of vengeance had brought him nothing but loneliness and bloodshed. Chapter 12. The New Town. Days turned into weeks, and Ringo found himself in the town of Willow Creek. Smaller and quieter than Red River, it had a peaceful charm that belied the harshness of the surrounding desert. He rode in at dusk, the sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He stabled his horse and walked into the local saloon, where the piano played a melancholy tune. The barkeep, an older man with a friendly smile, served him a drink without asking questions. "Welcome to Willow Creek," the barkeep said. "Name's Sam. Haven't seen you around before. Just passing through," Ringo replied, taking a sip of whiskey. "Passing through, eh?" Sam's eyes twinkled with curiosity. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you like. Folks around here are friendly mostly." Ringo nodded, appreciating the warm reception, but he knew his presence was a harbinger of trouble, and trouble always found him. Chapter 13. A new threat. Ringo's arrival didn't go unnoticed. Among the town's residents was a man named Barrett Cole, a wealthy rancher with a reputation for ruthlessness. Cole had ambitions to control all the land around Willow Creek, and anyone who stood in his way met an untimely end. One evening, as Ringo walked the streets, he was confronted by a group of Cole's men. They blocked his path, hands resting on their gun belts. "You're in the wrong town, stranger," the leader growled. "Barrett Cole, don't take kindly to drifters." Ringo's eyes narrowed. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Too late for that," the man sneered, reaching for his gun. But Ringo was faster. His Colt .45 roared, and the man fell, clutching his chest. The others hesitated, seeing the cold determination in Ringo's eyes, and backed away. "Tell Cole I'm not here to fight," Ringo said, holstering his weapon. "But if he comes for me, he better be ready." Chapter 14. Allies and Enemies. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, and Ringo found himself both feared and respected. Among those who approached him was a young sheriff named Ethan Briggs. Unlike Sheriff Tate, Briggs was inexperienced but eager to protect his town. "Mr. Ringo," Briggs said, tipping his hat, "I hear you're good with a gun. We could use someone like you." Ringo studied the young sheriff. "I'm not looking to stay. Trouble follows me, and I don't want to bring it here." "Trouble's already here," Briggs replied. "Barrett Cole's been terrorizing this town for years. We need someone who can stand up to him." Ringo sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I'll help you, Sheriff. But when this is over, I ride out." Briggs nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's all I can ask." Chapter 15. The Calm Before the Storm. Ringo spent the next few days preparing the town for the inevitable showdown. He trained the townsfolk, much like he had in Red River, teaching them to defend their homes. Among his trainees was a young boy named Tommy, whose eagerness reminded Ringo of himself at that age. As they prepared, Ringo grew closer to the townspeople, especially Sheriff Briggs and Sam the barkeep. He began to feel a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years. But the threat of Barrett Cole loomed large, and Ringo knew that peace was fragile. Chapter 16. The Final Showdown. The day of reckoning arrived with a blood-red sunrise. Barrett Cole and his men rode into Willow Creek, their faces set in grim determination. The town was eerily quiet, the tension thick as molasses. Ringo stood in the center of town, his hand hovering near his Colt. Sheriff Briggs and the townsfolk took up positions, ready to defend their home. Cole dismounted, a cruel smile on his lips. "You think you can stop me, stranger?" "I've stopped men like you before," Ringo replied, his voice steady. Cole's smile vanished. "Then let's see how fast you really are." The air was electric as both men drew their guns. Ringo's shot was true, his Colt barking once, twice. Cole staggered, blood blossoming on his shirt, and fell to the ground. Cole's men hesitated, then turned and fled, their leader's demise breaking their spirit. Chapter 17. The Aftermath. With Barrett Cole dead, the town of Willow Creek breathed a collective sigh of relief. The threat that had loomed over them for so long was finally gone. Sheriff Briggs thanked Ringo, his gratitude evident in his eyes. "You saved us, Ringo," Briggs said. "We owe you more than we can ever repay." Ringo shook his head. just doing what needed to be done. The townspeople celebrated their newfound freedom, but Ringo knew it was time to move on. He packed his belongings, ready to ride out once more. Chapter 18. Farewell. Before he left, Ringo visited the gravesite of those who had fallen, paying his respects. As he mounted his horse, Sam the barkeep approached him. "You're a good man, Ringo," Sam said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Ringo tipped his hat. "Maybe one day, Sam. Maybe one day." With that, he rode out of Willow Creek, the horizon stretching before him. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Chapter 19. A New Dawn. Ringo's journey took him across the vast expanse of the West, through deserts and mountains, towns and ghost towns. He helped those in need, fought those who deserved it, and slowly, the weight of his past began to lift. In his travels, he heard stories of a legendary gunslinger who roamed the frontier, a man who stood up for the helpless and brought justice to the lawless. The stories didn't always match his own experiences, but they gave him a sense of purpose. He knew he couldn't outrun his past, but he could shape his future. And so, with each new town and each new adventure, Ringo McAllister continued his journey, a wandering cowboy seeking redemption under the endless sky of the American West. Chapter 20. The Ghost of Calico Ridge. Months passed as Ringo drifted from town to town. Each new place brought its own challenges and characters, but none quite like Calico Ridge. Nestled in the shadow of the towering red cliffs, Calico Ridge was a mining town, rich with silver and rife with conflict. As Ringo approached, the town seemed eerily quiet. He could sense the tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. He rode slowly down the main street, taking in the deserted buildings and shuttered windows. At the saloon, he tied his horse and stepped inside. The place was almost empty, save for a few weary miners and a bartender who eyed him warily. "What brings you to Calico Ridge, stranger?" the bartender asked, wiping a glass with a rag that looked like it had seen better days. "Just passing through," Ringo replied, his standard line. "Name's Ringo." The bartender's eyes widened slightly. "Ringo McAllister, the gunslinger?" "That's right," Ringo said, a hint of weariness in his voice. The bartender nodded. "Name's Hank. We might just need a man like you round here." Ringo sighed inwardly. What's the trouble? Chapter 21. The Tyrant of Calico Ridge. Hank explained the situation. Calico Ridge was under the thumb of a ruthless mine owner named Silas Kane. Kane controlled the silver mines and, by extension, the entire town. His enforcers kept the miners in line, and anyone who dared oppose him ended up in a shallow grave out in the desert. Ringo listened, his expression grim. It was a story he'd heard too many times before. "Where can I find this Kane?" "He's got a big house on the hill, overlooking the town," Hank said. "But be careful. He's got a small army of hired guns." Ringo nodded. "Thanks for the warning. I'll look into it." Chapter 22. The Miner's Plight. Ringo spent the next few days in Calico Ridge, getting to know the townsfolk and the miners. He saw firsthand the fear and desperation in their eyes. Kane's men patrolled the streets, watching everyone with suspicion. One evening, Ringo met a young miner named Billy, who told him about the brutal conditions in the mines and the meager wages they received. "We work ourselves to the bone, and Kane gets rich while we starve," Billy said bitterly. Ringo felt a familiar anger rising within him. He knew he couldn't stand by and let this continue. He decided it was time to confront Silas Kane. Chapter 23. The Confrontation. Under the cover of darkness, Ringo made his way up the hill to Kane's mansion. The building was as imposing as its owner, with guards stationed at every entrance. Ringo approached cautiously, taking out the guards one by one until he reached the main door. He burst inside, his Colt 45 drawn. Kane was in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, when Ringo confronted him. "Ringo McAllister," Kane sneered. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Your reign of terror ends tonight," Ringo said coldly. Kane laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can take me down? You're just one man." "One man who's had enough of your kind," Ringo replied. They drew their guns simultaneously. The room exploded in gunfire, and when the smoke cleared, Kane lay dead on the floor, a bullet through his heart. Chapter 24. The Liberation. With Kane dead, Ringo knew his men would soon come looking for him. He quickly made his way back to the town, rallying the miners and townsfolk. Armed with whatever they could find, they stood ready to defend their town. Kane's men arrived at dawn, expecting an easy fight. Instead, they were met with fierce resistance. Ringo led the charge, his Colt barking death with every pull of the trigger. The battle was short but intense, and in the end, the townsfolk emerged victorious. Chapter 25. A New Beginning. The death of Silas Kane brought a new beginning to Calico Ridge. The miners took control of the mines, and the town began to rebuild. Ringo was hailed as a hero, though he was quick to downplay his role. "Just did what needed to be done," he told them, echoing his words from Willow Creek. But as the celebrations continued, Ringo knew it was time to move on. He packed his things and prepared to leave, his horse ready for the long trail ahead. Chapter 26. The Lone Rider. Ringo felt a sense of peace as he rode out of Calico Ridge. He had helped another town, stood up to another tyrant, and made a difference. But he also knew that his journey was far from over. The West was a vast and wild place, filled with towns that needed saving and people who needed hope. And Ringo McAllister would continue to ride as long as there was breath in his body and bullets in his gun. He was a lone rider, a gunslinger with a heart of gold, and a man seeking redemption on the blood-soaked trails of the American frontier. And with each new town and challenge, he moved a little closer to finding it. Blood on the Prairie is an epic tale of redemption and survival, a story that captures the essence of the cowboy spirit. Through vivid characters, a gripping plot, and a setting as harsh as it is beautiful, this novel takes readers on a journey through the heart of the American frontier. Ringo McAllister's quest for redemption is a testament to the enduring spirit of the Wild West, where justice is won through grit, determination, and the unwavering courage of a gunslinger. If you are enjoying adventures in the Old West, hit the subscribe button for future posts.